So the title of this video is A Record Which Will Never Be Broken. Now, the thumbnail is a picture of John L. Gardner from Hackney, and then obviously Paul Sykes from Wakefield. Now, what I'm talking about is the record, which is, and it still stands today, 44 years on. So basically, Paul Sykes and John L. Gardner fought for not only the British Heavyweight Championship, but the Commonwealth, and the record still stands today. Sykes fought for those with only 8 contests, and yes, there will be flyweights. There could be strawweights. I'm sure Selby fought for a British. Yeah, I'm even sure Paul Weir fought for a world title at like 7 stone 7, which is like the lightest weight. But to fight for the British and the Commonwealth after only 8 fights as a heavyweight, and of course as 33-year-old by then. It kind of says 32, but it was 33. Yeah, that will never be done again. You know, it's harder than it sounds. You know, Audley Harrison went public when he won the Olympics, and he said, "I will win the British title after 5 fights." I think it was Danny Williams was the champion, and yeah, Audley Harrison went pro 2001. Fought Audley Harrison for the British title 2005. I think he might have had about 20 fights by then. Yeah, so certainly it was a lot more than 5. You know, I met the filmmakers Roger Greenwood and Nick Lord of Paul Sykes at Large in 2015. It was I met him at the hotel where they actually used to meet Paul Sykes. It was the Majestic. It's probably the plushest hotel in Harrogate, and that's where they used to meet up to plan the documentary. And I was with Paul's only sibling, and of course they hadn't seen each other for like nearly 30 years by then. And that week, I'll always remember, it was massive in the paper. Anthony Joshua fighting Dillian White for the British and the Commonwealth. To give you an example of how big that was actually pay-per-view. You know, so that was, I was speaking to Martin O'Neill a couple of years ago, and he said, so when Nottingham Forest won the European Cup in '79 against Malmo, he said it was big news. It was in the big news that John L. Gardner was defending his title against Paul Sykes. John L. Gardner was 65, maybe 64 even, definitely 65, and Paul Sykes was 8-13. Sykes had John L. Gardner had been on the floor against a light puncher in a previous fight, Billy Aird, I think it was, and so Sykes was a massive, you know, big puncher. He'd knocked out Neville Mead, who 3 years after that went on to win a British title. You know, he had the bad guy image, and the bookies were convinced that it was going to be Sykes early or Gardner late, and yeah, it was, as I said, facing a champion. As you know, John L. Gardner was very, very unlucky. Never got the fight against Ali. Basically, John L. Gardner said to me, he said, so he was Ali's mandatory. You know, he won the British, won the Commonwealth, won the European, and basically Ali gave up instead of facing Gardner, but then come out of retirement to face Trevor Berbick and Larry Holmes. Yeah, so John L. Gardner's words, not me, where he was to too scared to lose to a white man. He said he was that racist. He wouldn't have cream in his coffee. Yeah, Mickey Duff basically put the fight on with Gardner Sykes. Of course, it was Wembley Arena, that's where the cartel had. So you had Mickey Duff, you had Terry Lawless, you had Mike Barrett, and you had Jarvis Astaire. And they were kind of the big fish, if you like. They were kind of like your Frank Warrens. They were, nothing happened in boxing without their say so. They were incredibly influential. Yeah, as I said, that record will never, ever be broke again. Certainly not in this lifetime, where a heavyweight is going to fight for 2 titles in only after 8 fights. Yeah, I mean, I'll have to have a look at Box Rec, but I'm sure Audley Harrison had about 18. It was far removed from saying, well, I'll actually come out and I'll win the British title after 5 fights. He actually said, I'll beat Paul Sykes' record, and I think he had something like 18 fights by the time. And then he lost to Danny Williams, and he didn't beat him for the year after that. But it wasn't for a British title. Certainly wasn't for 2 titles. So, yeah, whatever, Sykes went very public and he said, I would have been dead of gonorrhea if I'd have won that title, meaning I would have slept with everything. He said in his book, he said, I was born to fight at British champion. British titles back then, in 1979, a British title, a Lord Lonsdale title, is the most prestigious belt in boxing, really. British were the home of boxing. But winning a British title back in 1979, early 80s, was the what's the word? On par with maybe winning a European title today. There was so many really, really top fighters, and that's just in Britain. So that's why there was so many. These days you can win a title. There's belts growing off trees. Do you know what I mean? You can win a title playing snakes and ladders. It's ridiculous. But that's when boxing was boxing. Do you know what I mean? So let me know your thoughts. Paul Sykes fought for the Lord Lonsdale Marquess of Queensberry belt in his 9th fight. So he had eight contests. That will never be broken. Definitely not for a heavyweight. I personally don't even think a middleweight, welterweight, I couldn't even see a lightweight, even featherweight beating that. As I said, certainly not even bantamweights, flyweights, light flyweights, strawweights, maybe super flyweights at a push. But there's just that massive gulp in class. And what is impressive was when Sykes fought for the British title and the Commonwealth. So from 17 to 30, he'd actually only had 9 months in society. So 9 months, and in that time he sparred with Joe Fraser in 1973 down at the old Thomas a Becket gym on the old Kent Road. That was when Fraser come over to spar with Joe Bugner. That was he was paid, and Yankee Durham, Yance, can I pronounce his name? Yankee Durham or Yancey Durham wanted to take Sykes back. He was that impressed with him, and of course he did. He did go to America for I think it was maybe a month, and he was a chief sparring partner to Leon Spinks when he fought Ali. Of course, back them days, being a big heavyweight was 6'3", which is what Ali was, and of course these days they're all 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", but if you were a heavyweight back then, like Sykes was a 6'3", you were a huge heavyweight. It didn't really start getting big till probably the 80s, maybe even the 90s. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Paul Sykes still holds the title to this day. It's not going to be broke anytime soon. Any people really serious boxing anoraks like myself who they study the game, and they take note. And yeah, let us know your thoughts. John Gardner, Paul Sykes. And do you know that fight? I've watched it. I must have watched that fight 30, 40. I actually watched that fight with John Gardner um, years ago. And was it 6 rounds, I think it was, wasn't it? But for the first 3 rounds, it was 50-50. And, obviously, Sykes, he'd shot his bolt, as what he described to John Spenceley. He was convinced that Gardner wouldn't see the fourth. So, and he did nail him as well. Even John Gardner said to me, he said, I got hit with some shots in that fight that really made my toes curl. And that's only an expression that probably, if you've ever boxed, you can really get it and smell your own blood and you think, well, I'm not shit on boxing here. But you get hit that hard and your toes kind of almost crunch into your boots. He said when I got that close to him, he said he was huge. They had trouble getting the gloves on his hands, as you can see in the ring on YouTube. But yeah, let us know your thoughts. A record which is never going to be broken. Let us know your thoughts. Can anyone break it? No, and certainly not for the double. Do you know what I mean? There's the British and the Commonwealth. Yes, the people think it's the British, then the Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth is lesser known. The British is harder. That's because we've always had a great influx of top elite fighters. You think of your Commonwealth, you think of your Ghana, your New Zealand. Not really the greatest, albeit it is a top belt. And then obviously after that you've got the European, and of course the world. Back in them days there was like the WBC. I think maybe the WBA had just come out then as well. But there wasn't this WBO and all that kind of thing. And, so many people can call themselves, there's the IBO, the WBF, the WBU. It's ridiculous, the amount of titles there is in boxing. So let us know your thoughts, comments below. Don't forget to click and subscribe. God bless.